Welcome to Global Perspectives. How important are protocol and etiquette in the global marketplace? Fannie Allen, a Washington institution, has the answers.
Global Perspectives with Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator John Bercia.
Welcome to the show, Fannie.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome. Before we talk about the intricacies of protocol and etiquette, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into this business and what, if anything, you were doing before. And I know you were doing lots of things before, but tell us a little bit about the Fannie Allen story.
Okay, very fine. Thank you. A native Georgian going into Washington, D.C., working for the federal government, first the Department of Defense, and then the former United States Information Agency, and then the Department of State. So that was my introduction to international affairs. Traveled extensively for the U.S. Information Agency, and what an experience that was in parts of the world that I could only read about. From there, I joined the United States Army Reserves. My family background, Air Force and Navy, and I decided to go into the Army Reserves. I can say that the experience in both international affairs and the military convinced me to start my company supporting etiquette and protocol for both youth as well as adults.
And this was something that took a long time to plan, or did you just have the inspiration and got into it quickly?
Very good question, thank you. Slowly getting into it, and I knew I needed credentials in order to further my career in the industry. And I feel that it was a good time to do it because of the informality that I was seeing around me. Starting from the outset, I worked with colleges and universities before I branched out to doing business with corporate America, with nonprofits.
Talk to us about the growing informality of American society and at the same time the increasing coarseness that we seem to encounter, and that is evident even in presidential debates, presidential candidate debates during the campaign.
Yes.
Why is that happening, do you think? And is it something that is inevitably going to get worse, or do you see us with the pendulum returning to more of a middle ground?
I wonder sometime if it is as a result of the fast pace of life that we are leading now, with parents having less time. Many times in a household, both the mother and the father are working. So we'll work first from the youth level. Because there's not a lot of time taken, I feel, with parent and children to further educate them, to provide support in what's happening out in the world, may be part of the reason. This fast pace means that we're more technology driven, and technology is going nowhere. It is the part of our lives these days. So I think with those kinds of things going on, it contributes to the lack of soft skill training, the lack of civility, and the care and concern of people. You find that in a lot of cases, thank you and please is not used as much as it has been in the past, but should be. Because we've leaned so far with the informality in dress, how we communicate, it could very well be part of the problem. We communicate both verbally and non-verbally, and sometimes I don't think people realize what is happening.
Do you think we're communicating as effectively as we might? It seems that the over-reliance on cell phones and texting and things like that, especially among young people, has contributed to some communication barriers. And I often see young people in restaurants, presumably with their parents and maybe some of their friends, and they're texting each other during the meal,
True.
which strikes me as strange. And they often seem to have trouble engaging in simple tasks such as ordering from the menu.
Very true, very, very true. Technology is wonderful, absolutely wonderful, and I feel that that fascination with it, how it's being used by both individuals and corporations or businesses, because of that fascination, they're driven to it. And as you pointed out, there's less conversation, there's less small talk. That's between peers as well as in families. With the support of parents providing more strict control, and maybe I shouldn't say control, guidance, I think we would have a group of youth that would have more communication. And that lack of communication sometimes restricts a person from getting a job opportunity, preparing a resume. I hear human resource directors talk about receiving resumes that have texting language. Mm-hmm. Someone has not coached them into what it takes to put a resume together.
So what about among adults, especially professional adults? Many of them don't think they need any protocol or etiquette training, and yet in most cases they could all use some.
Yes.
How important is such training, especially when dealing with dignitaries from other countries, business people from other countries, or even just typical professional folks who may be here on some kind of official government trip to the United States? How important is it to have the right kind of training to greet and host those individuals?
With etiquette and protocol, it's all communication. And we communicate verbally and non-verbally. If we have guests coming into the United States, I feel it is incumbent upon all of us to be prepared to receive them, to welcome them as guests to our country. In doing that, just as we have protocol here in the United States, they have it in their country also. So we should be amenable to, one, receiving them, and secondly, to knowing more about their culture in order to welcome them into our home country. So very, very important in terms of communication.
Now, there are some business people who say to me, well, I understand why it's important to adhere to the cultural practices of the country in which I'm doing business or seeking to do business, but when people from those countries come here, they should adhere to what we practice. And oftentimes that's not good advice, especially when cultures differ tremendously. And I know you have instructed audiences multiple times on the details of business card etiquette, for example.
Yes.
Maybe give us an example of how business card etiquette varies from this country to Asia, for example.
Let's say, as you pointed out, Asia. As we present our business cards, no, let's go back to how they present their business cards. They present them with two hands. They present them such that you can view that and read that card. And they present it with a bent of a bow. When we present our cards, it's incumbent upon us to be able to present in the same way. In reading their card, we should acknowledge what's on the card, not just take the card and put it away. We're showing sensitivity. We're showing interest in letting them know how important they are. Yes.
And that should apply whether we're there engaging in this meeting activity or they're here.
Exactly, exactly. And many times what I found through my reading, that when businessmen from Asia visit our country, they go through etiquette and protocol classes in their home country in order to be better prepared to come to our country. And I feel that we should do also the same.
So when you give a protocol and etiquette session to a group of adults, perhaps people who are planning to visit another country for the first time, What are the types of subjects that you address on a regular basis? What are the things that people need to know generally, regardless of whether they're going to China or India or someplace in Africa or Latin America?
They should be familiar with the customs of that country. Something as simple as the weather that they're going to be dealing with, but of course, working with the male in that country, working with the females in that country. Because many times, I won't say many times, there are times when females are received in a different way. So we should familiarize ourselves with the culture of that country to be better prepared from a business perspective, so that business etiquette side, and also from the dining etiquette side. Maybe there are particular foods that they need to be familiar with. We would not want to go and use a napkin in the wrong way. We would not want to go, and if a particular food is a specialty for that country, we want to know how to consume that food. Are we using knives and forks, or are we using our hands? So those are just some examples of the protocol associated with visiting another country.
Talk to us a little bit about dining etiquette. You mentioned it, and oftentimes people from the United States think that there's a very specific type of dining etiquette that is appropriate, and that's what should be practiced, and it doesn't work well in a lot of other countries, especially those that have dining etiquette that is 180 degrees different from what we have here.
That is true. Well, of course, with here in the United States, sitting down at a lunch or at a dinner, there are two styles of eating. How we use the knife and how we use the fork here in the U.S., whether it's the American style or the continental style. Being familiar with dining etiquette, I feel, puts an individual at a very serious comfort level, so that one is not wondering which fork to use, at what time during the meal, where to start. Having that comfort level puts the person in a better position to sit down and enjoy casual conversation or a business conversation.
Well, I like a blend of American and continental dining etiquette, and that's where my comfort level is. And quite frankly, I don't pay attention to others who may dislike how I'm employing a fork or a knife or something else. It's my own style, and as long as you're eating in a dignified manner, I don't think it's a problem. But there are some people who think it is a problem, and they think that you should practice consistently one style or another. What do you think?
Protocol says if you start with one style, you finish with one style. Mm-hmm. And the idea is, yes, we should have a comfort level, but we also, I think, want to err on the side of what is correct with respect to the people that we are dining with.
But what if your beginning style is blended? Should you change it so that you are practicing just the American style so that everyone else is comfortable with how you're dining?
I think it's a very good question. From my perspective, you should concentrate at least on one. Mm-hmm. However, if you have that blended style and the remaining features of your dining style are in line with what protocol is, I feel that you may be able to get away with that.
Mm-hmm. What about if you're overseas in a country, again, in Asia, where chopsticks are commonly in use during dining, and you may not be comfortable with chopsticks, you may not be familiar with them at all, and usually your guests, your hosts are very accommodating. They'll bring you fork and spoon and so forth, but sometimes, especially if you're in a far-flung location, that's not going to be very easily done. And is it appropriate to bring your own utensils with you, or should you really make the effort to learn how to eat with chopsticks?
I feel that you should make the attempt. Be courteous. Allow your host to see your attempt to use the chopsticks. rather than totally refusing. And I think it would be rude not to make the attempt to use the chopsticks. If you're going to that country, that's one of the things you may want to practice before you leave the United States, to get your skill level up to eating with chopsticks.
How do you deal with adults you're teaching when they come into your sessions with a bit of an attitude that they really do know everything and they're just doing it because a boss asked them to attend or for some other reason? And yet, as they go through the session, you start to see that they're reaching that aha moment, even though they may not want to admit it. How do you deal with attitude issues in your sessions?
Well, I try to put the group at ease, and whether it's adults or young children, because there is training going on at some point. But I feel we can always learn something. So I start my sessions off telling them a bit about who I am, and if I have the opportunity, how I got into the business, but also just letting them know that we learn daily. So it's just an enhancement of that which they have learned over time, and possibly sharing with them, just consider it a refresher course.
Have you ever encountered an adult student in one of your classes who felt the need to challenge you on everything you were saying, and what does that do for your presentation, your preparation, your own comfort level?
Yeah, it has happened, and the idea is to try to keep them calm and maybe share a few questions and allow them to be a part of the class. They've been trained, they understand, and you request their support during the session, because the session is not just that one person. If it's a class of 25, I personally have 24 other individuals that I have to be mindful of. So I'm trying to keep the person calm, to keep them focused, to keep them involved.
I'm imagining you at times get questions that are fairly outrageous. Could you give an example of one of those? And in your opinion, is there any question that is inappropriate to bring up at one of these sessions, or do you welcome all questions?
I welcome all questions. We're all learning all of the time, and do I have all of the answers? I do not. If it's a question that I cannot answer, I will allow the person to be patient, and then I would get back with them with a response. So yes, we do get questions that we can't answer all of the time.
What about young people? What are the kinds of questions that they typically ask in these sessions? And how important is it for young people to have this kind of training as early as possible?
Very important at a very, very early age. I start at age 5 in terms of the youth that I interact with. And for the very, very young, I use tea etiquette as a way of introducing them, something that's fun. And usually if it's fun, they have a tendency to get involved and participate. With, again, the importance, very, very important, because they are in a developmental stage of learning how to communicate. And allowing them to know or teaching them that they communicate not only verbally, but they communicate non-verbally. For the younger generation, I use presentation skills, what we normally call public speaking, giving them a very simple role to play, but to get them up and in front of peers and potentially in front of their parents, where they have a speaking role. First, they're uncomfortable, but with rehearsal, they come to find that I can handle this. And they find it a bit of a positive challenge, and they really do well. They really do well.
Do you ever hear from young people, older people, after the sessions are completed, maybe at some point in the future? Do they ever come back to you and say, thank you so much for helping me understand X culture, or learning the proper dining etiquette, because it's been very, very beneficial to me in my life.
I have, absolutely. At my alma mater, I was in a position to work with one of our 3-star general officers who was a graduate of the school. And I have a very serious compassion about leadership training. And we were able to establish a leadership program on the campus in his name. And with the first group that went through there, I did interact with several persons who had gone through the program. One ended up being a stewardess on one of the airlines, and they talked about how useful the training was. And of course, in that training, yes, there was leadership training. Etiquette is an essential tool of leadership, but with all the other training that was received, they found it very useful and started to talk about the things that they had gotten involved in after the program. One young lady went on to the military. She came back, and through a client, she asked that she share her appreciation of how confident she felt as a result of the training going into various areas. So it's always very, very important.
I know the Allen Institute reaches out to the Washington community on special projects. Could you give us a couple of examples of things that you do that we might not know about?
Okay. All right. Well, of course, we do etiquette and leadership camps for our 12 to 15-year-olds, and that's a way of introducing them to etiquette and protocol, but also other subjects. And we've had some political officials to work with us come in and join the class and work with the students. In a volunteer basis, I work with our detention center in my area. I work with reentry individuals, those going back out into society, for I feel they need a refresher in their communication skills because many of them will be looking for jobs. On the other side, I work with our homeless veterans. There's an organization called the Maryland Center for Veterans Education and Training, and through them and the help that they're giving our homeless veterans to get them back out into society, I have an opportunity to provide business etiquette training to them. So basically that communication training is very, very well received, and I enjoy doing it.
What advice would you offer to presidential candidates, not necessarily in the current campaign, but in general, because it seems that debate etiquette has been thrown out the window in many of these conversations?
There is a need for supporting civility. There's lots of incivility that's going on. Proper decorum has its place. Respect has its place. And my hope is that through, as you say, the debates that we're having right now, that they're just trying to get to the finish line, and unfortunately they're gone possibly way to the other side. But there is a place for diplomacy. There is a place for civility. There is a place for respect, politeness, being courteous and considerate.
Mm-hmm. We're coming to a close in our conversation, but I'm wondering, in general, should we ever stop trying to get protocol and etiquette training, or is there a need for that, at least for refreshers, lifelong?
In my humble opinion, as we close, there is a need. There's a need for us to be timely in the things that we're doing. There is a need for, once again, respect and civility in what we're doing. There is a need for proper dress in the things that we're doing. So a need, yes, and I'm glad we're going back into the direction of proper etiquette, proper protocol.
And you think we are definitely going in that direction?
That we are definitely going in that direction. Our younger millennials are seeing the need, and they're seeking out soft skill training for their professions.
Good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Fanny Allen.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you. For Global Perspectives, I'm John Bercia, and we'll see you next time.